Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my den here in the heart of the northwest of England. I'm completely surrounded by the Grog Squad. This is Virtual Grog Meet, an online convention that's supposed to be online. The first Virtual Grog Meet was 5 years ago, when all we had were 2 cups on the end of a very long string. But it was an event that launched a dozen online gaming groups, and now everyone's at it. I'm in the Zoom of role-playing rambling with a very special guest, Tim Harford. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Dirk.
Now, here on my left, I've got my ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. Would you like to give it a tap, Tim?
Oh, I need quite long arms, but I'm sending the thought waves. Yeah, there you go. Tapped it.
Okay, here we go. Let's see. The Eternal Champion appears. Oh, look, she's appeared with Dusty Bin as a presenter, the Eternal Champion as a presenter on 3-2-1. 3-2-1.
Yeah, could you do 3-2-1? Oh, I did it the wrong way around.
Well, you're good with numbers, aren't you? You're good with numbers, so that's why that's appeared. So that's good. So you're a broadcaster, columnist, economist, best-selling author, podcaster, and role player. What did you put on your census return?
Oh, definitely role player. That's the way forward.
And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. I've been reading your book, The Undercover Economist, a great book about the invisible hand of the economy and how it shapes our lives. I can't find the chapter about what happens to a small town when a group of adventurers arrive with 5,000 gold pieces taken from a dungeon.
It's a good one. There's a guy called Ed Castronova. He wrote about 15 years ago a book about virtual worlds, virtual economies. And he was particularly interested in games such as, I think, EverQuest and then World of Warcraft. And he wanted to understand how economies worked by doing things like dumping a massive infusion of magic items into a game such as World of Warcraft and seeing what a difference it made. And his idea was you could have different servers with different rules, so different money supply or different supply of items. And the idea would be that you could run experiments and see what happened, which is not so easy to do in the real world. So I feel that Castronova is the guy who would really be able to answer this, but I'll give it a go. It's pretty simple. If a bunch of adventurers show up with a load of cash, prices are going to go up in the short run because they've got so much cash. There's so few things they can spend their money on. But I would expect there'd be a supply response. So people would be flocking to wherever the adventurers were. They'd just be surrounded by hangers-on. It's a little bit like if you're a tourist in a country that's very poor. You're just constantly being surrounded by people trying to sell you stuff. So I imagine you'd see this inflation. You'd see people trying to rip the tourists off. But there would also be this experience of just being surrounded by people trying to sell you anything, possibly with no idea whatsoever of what an adventurer would really want. So that's just a guess.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about your life as a role player and your first, last, and everything. So we always start our interviews by asking about your first game experience. What did you play, and who were you playing with?
So I was playing with a guy called Richard Till, who I hadn't been in touch with for at least 35 years, but he lived on the next street over. I used to live in Chesterfield, so just sort of on the borders between the North and the Midlands. And that's where my early gaming experiences were. And I remember Richard explaining to me one day about these things called role-playing games. And of course, I just couldn't understand a word he was saying. I was like, what is it like on a computer? Has it got a board? The same conversations I think everybody has until they've actually seen a game played. But the game that Richard was into was Tunnels and Trolls. And so he ran a game for me, and I mean, this game, I really enjoyed it, but he was grumpy. He thought I hadn't played it very well, or I talked too much or something. So it was a slightly unsatisfying experience because I enjoyed myself, and then he was kind of cross with me because I'd done it wrong in some way. I don't know. Solo adventures. So I could just play by myself, get really used to the rules. Tons and Trolls is all about rolling buckets of dice. It's really good for your mental arithmetic. It's probably made me the nerd I am today. But fortunately, I think Richard was a couple of years older than me, but I had kids in my own class who it was very easy to persuade them to start playing. So I started running games for them and they'd run games. And so fortunately, I never had that agony of just desperately wanting someone to play with because there was a ready supply of like-minded folk. So yeah, Tunnels and Trolls was the first game.
So those solo adventures that you went for, do you remember which one of those sticks in your mind?
One that sticks in my mind because it was so compact was Goblin Lake, which was a micro adventure. I mean, it was about 12 pages long and how many paragraphs it had, but somehow managed to, you're supposed to be a goblin and you get into this underground complex of goblins and you can fight and become their chief, or you can get thrown into the trash pile or whatever. There was just so much going on in such a small space of kind of real estate. Very, very different from, say, the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, which obviously is fighting fantasy rather than Tunnels and Trolls, but I had that as well. And that just felt like this incredibly long, complicated, like you could never get to the end. There's no way you'd ever be able to finish it. That's how I felt. There's Goblin Lake you could play through in about 5 minutes, and then you'd kind of go back and you'd play it again in a different way. And there were just all sorts of different possible ways to play it. But the other one that really sticks in my mind is Overkill, which there was something quite tactical about that one. So I think you were on a mission to assassinate a necromancer called Marianarsis. You had to break into his castle and just take the guy out. And there were lots and lots of different ways to do it. That was quite high level. I think it was a Michael Stackpole adventure. But there were loads. I mean, I had loads and I loved them all. They were quite varied. Tunnels and Trolls is quite eclectic. Never really had a vision of, a really sort of tightly plotted, gritty universe. It was just anything goes in Tunnels and Trolls. It was great fun.
Yes, absolutely, including orcs in zoot suits with violin cases and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, Liz Danforth, who you've identified, she had put this real visual stamp on it, so it was distinctive in that way. But other than that, it was a game that just didn't take itself too seriously. It was great fun.
So you started with TNT. What did you move on to? What were the other games that you were playing at the time?
So the next game that I picked up was, I think I picked up Basic Dungeons and Dragons at some stage, the red box with, I think it's a Larry Elmore, is that a painting with the sort of barbarian fighting the big red dragon. And it was fine, but I never really got into D&D. But I picked up, after reading an advert in White Dwarf, I picked up the first book of Dragon Warriors. And that I just found completely spellbinding, because it was quite simple to play, but it had a little bit more to it than Tunnels and Trolls, which really was just roll lots of dice and get a big number. But the really great thing about Dragon Warriors was there was this real sense of, it wasn't anything goes. There was this world, and the world had certain rules, and it was quite similar to your vision of a medieval world, but with folk tales, and the goblins would be really potentially quite eerie. They wouldn't be these sort of comic figures. They could cast a spell on you. It showed me that role-playing games could be a bit more serious in a good way than Tunnels and Trolls. And I do remember just reading this thing and thinking, this is amazing. This is a fantastic game.
We covered it recently, and returning to the mechanics, I think it struck us that it wasn't the mechanics that we remembered. It was the appeal of the world that it was set in, and all the writing is very very rich, isn't it, and rewarding.
Yeah, I remember listening to, I was really going to date myself, listening to Enya's Watermark, which is obviously one of the greatest albums of all time. Well, certainly for role-playing, it's got that Celtic sensibility to it. And I was reading possibly book 4, I can't remember, but the monster descriptions in book 4, and Watermark was going on in the background. I wasn't really paying any attention to it, but it was setting the mood. And I was reading the description of the boggart, and the boggart had wine dark eyes. And now I'm a grown up, and I realize that's a reference to Homer over the wine dark sea. Because I had no idea about Homer when I was 12 or 13 years old and reading this book. But I just thought, wow, that's wine dark eyes is quite a striking image. And it was full of that stuff, and just really, really cast a spell.
Adam Rosser kindly sent me an edition of More or Less that he did about role playing. You managed to sneak it in around the time of Gary Gygax passing away. Yeah. And you spoke to Michael Gove, which I'm sorry about that. You have my sympathies, and Ian Livingstone, and you were talking about, as you said, the educational influence of RPGs and how it captured a particular period of time and educated people in a particular way.
Yeah. I don't remember much about, I remember meeting Gove and Ian Livingstone. And Michael Gove, I have to say, this is about 2008, I think, when Gary Gygax died. And so Gove was very charming and great fun on the radio. And this is all, before everything that's happened in the last 5 years. And but obviously I was meeting Ian Livingstone, so I was a bit starstruck. And they were both great, but we were trying to convey to people who might or might know who Gary Gygax was or what role playing was a little bit of this in about 6 minutes, which is quite tricky. But in the end, we did point out that there's just a lot of maths in these games. I seem to remember Dungeons and Dragons had a diagram of a bell curve when you roll 3d6, and just the for me, it's not super complicated, but the constant low level exposure to maths, the mental arithmetic in Tunnels and Trolls. Tunnels and Trolls, you just got to roll 10 dice and add them up, and you start to be able to do that really fast, because otherwise it's going to take ages to play. That, I think, builds your confidence in handling numbers and handling mathematics. And you're motivated to do it, and it's fun to do it. You want to do it. It doesn't feel like work, but you very quickly acquire that fluency. I think that probably is important.
Yeah, and also it has impact on your reading list as well, doesn't it? So it expands your knowledge that way as well, doesn't it? In terms of history and literature.
Yeah, you want to pick up all of this stuff and figure out what happened in great battles or what a castle was like. Although I do remember my father picking up some of these solo Tunnels and Trolls adventures, and some of them, I have to say, had nudity and adult themes. I guess I was about a 13-year-old boy, and actually I don't remember being particularly fascinated by pictures of naked ladies drawn by Liz Danforth. I must have been, but I don't remember it being particularly interesting. But I remember my dad sort of having a word with me that maybe I should stick to the books that didn't have naked ladies in them, and there was plenty of that as well.
And so, where were you buying your games at this time? Where did you pick them up?
So it would be a special treat to get to go to Games Workshop in Sheffield. So there was a branch of Games Workshop, probably only about 10 branches in the country at the time, on the Moor, which is this big pedestrian. Which the Moor sounds terrific. It's big pedestrianised sprawl in the middle of Sheffield. I don't know. It's probably delightful now. It's probably been reshaped. But I just love to go there and browse. And this was a time, of course, when Games Workshop weren't just selling miniatures. They'd be selling all sorts of games. You pick up the Games Workshop catalogue, and it would just be all of these games that you couldn't possibly afford by these mysterious people. Judges Guild. I don't know who those guys are, but this sounds amazing. Thieves World. This sounds amazing. So that was the place. The other one was Forever People in Bristol, because my grandparents on both sides lived in the Bristol area. And so I would, when we'd go to visit my grandparents they live fairly centrally in Bristol. And I could walk down to Forever People in about 20, 30 minutes. And it used to be on this it's not there anymore. I think it's still in Bristol, but it's not in the centre. It used to be on this very steep hill that I can't remember the name of, that goes down towards the cathedral in Bristol. and very, very sort of atmospheric place. And you'd walk down this very, very steep hill, and you'd buy your games, you'd buy one because that's all you could afford on your pocket money. And then you turn around and you walk back up the hill, and it was just wonderful to browse there. Yeah, we didn't have the online stuff.
It was one of those mythic places for other people that you saw in the back of White Dwarf. They had a zombie, I think, on the advert, and I always wanted to go just to. It sounded amazing. Yeah.
No, it was great. I had a conversation once with. I bought a solo adventure, and I think it was £3, and I think my pocket money at the time was 30 pence, and I didn't have a paper round at the time, so I basically spent 10 weeks' income on this £3 game book. And I think they were having a conversation with an adult customer, and I sort of bought this, and I'd said I'd spent 10 weeks pocket money on this. And he turned to the guy and he said, "Why don't you come in here and spend 10 weeks income on my stuff like this young gentleman is doing?" So, yeah. But that was it. That was all you wanted to spend your money on was games. Well, what else was there to spend money on when you were 12 or 13 years old?
And bring it to the current day. So you're still role-playing. You're still actively role-playing. So what was the last game that you played?
Yeah. So unlike you, Dirk, I never really gave it up. So just sort of kept through. Well, one of the wonderful things that happened to me was when I was about 20, I met Dave Morris, who is with Oliver Johnson, was the co-creator of Dragon Warriors. So it's really meeting your heroes. But we stay friends and we play in a group together regularly. So if you've got the opportunity to play games with Dave Morris, you're not ever going to quit, right? You've just got to keep that alive. So I've been playing really ever since. So what was we've just finished a one-off Christmas special that ran past Easter, that was run by a friend of mine, Aaron, and that was using GURPS and set in Legend, which is the background of Dragon Warriors. So we're still, I think Dave is possibly slightly fed up of playing in Legend. Actually, I'm not sure he is, but Dave is very happy to. It's not like he's sitting there going, "No, we must play in my game world or nothing." He's very happy to spread his wings and try all sorts of things. But I think a lot of the rest of us are still slightly addicted to playing in Legend. So yeah, we had a one-off Christmas special that ran through till April, and then I'm just about to start a game using Dave's system, Jewel Spider, which is still not quite finished, but it's sort of the sequel to Dragon Warriors. It's if you created Dragon Warriors, but you made it a 21st century game, so it wasn't quite so crunchy. Was more interested in the role playing. It really brought those elements of mystery and folktale more to the foreground and tried to put them in the rules as well. So that's what we're doing, and it's a quest for it's sort of a Grail quest. What the Grail actually is, and whether it's the kind of thing that you might ever want to find. Well, we'll see. But it's a slightly ambiguous Grail with slightly ambiguous folk trying to get hold of it.
I know that when we were speaking to Dave, he was saying that he wasn't quite sure where his rules ended and your improvisation started. And so what stage is Jewel Spider in at the moment?
Yeah, no, I'm slightly irritated because I thought, well, look, we're still playtesting it. So I'm going to pick up Jewel Spider and I'll use this, although the rules aren't quite finished, because we we owe it to Dave to playtest the rules. And then I turned to the magic system, and the magic system is still kind of, it's all in red and footnotes and, maybe it'll be a bit like, I'm like, Dave, am I going to have to write your magic system for you? So anyway, I'm trying to put something together that works. But it's not easy for Legend because it has got that real sense of mystery. And so a lot of magic systems have this problem. You don't want them to be too codified. You want it to be a bit mysterious and a bit unpredictable. But then when you say that as a game designer, you're basically saying, I don't know, let's see what happens. So I understand why Dave is possibly slightly hesitating to put anything down on paper, because the moment you put it down on paper, you're saying it's this way and it's not that way. And actually, you want to preserve that mystery.
And that's always the challenge, isn't it, with magic systems, whether you have something that is free form, that actually breaks everything else, or whether you have something that's rigidly codified. And there's I guess there's a balance both ways, because players do like to have spell lists, don't they, to rub against. And I think Robin Law says it's kind of a shopping list to pick from.
Yeah.
And people enjoy that, don't they?
They do. There are a couple of ideas that I found interesting. I went back to Ars Magica, which is a game that people really rate, but I never played it at the time. I got some supplements and I thought they were great, but I never really understood what they were talking about because I didn't have the original rules. And a friend of mine lent me a classic copy of Ars Magica. And that's a really interesting system where it's very atmospheric in the way it's described. It's all the words are in Latin. But basically, you've got nouns and verbs. So a verb might be to create or destroy or to understand. And then the nouns would be a spirit or fire or an animal, only all in Latin. And with those building blocks, it tells you how good you are at a particular spell that involves that noun and that verb. And there are spell lists. But you can also just try and make something up and improvise. And that, I thought, well, that's interesting. That's worth a try. There is another nice tweak in Dave's multiplayer game book, Bloodsword, which again is set in legend. The wizards in that system, they can hold spells in mind, like a classic D&D Vancian mage. You've got a list of spells and you're remembering them, and when you cast them, they're gone. And that's always felt a bit weird. But the way it works is every spell you hold in mind reduces your spell casting ability. But you can always summon a new spell to mind, but it takes time to do that. So it's a question of how many loaded guns do you want to carry around. If you're carrying too many, one of them's going to go off and blow off your own foot. But you want to carry some loaded guns because you don't want to have to be loading the guns when the time comes to the action. So anyway, I'm playing around with all of this stuff, but I kind of wish Dave had done it because he's better than I am at this sort of thing.
I know that one of the systems that you use regularly is GURPS, isn't it? Have you been trying to dismantle GURPS a little as well?
Yeah, so GURPS I loved when I first encountered, and I think I must have been about 16, 17, and I had the energy to read everything and to really absorb it and to really know how it worked. And that was GURPS 3rd edition. And I've just been slowly forgetting it for 25 years. I think it's a very Zen process, right? This is what Zen mastery is like. Like I kind of know how it works, but I forget more and more and more details. And the 4th edition came out and all my players read the 4th edition, but I mean, I've got it, but I've never had time to read it. And people tell me it's similar, but better. So I've got this game that I haven't read the latest version of the rules and I keep forgetting the old rules. But in a way, that's working really well because the thing that people love about GURPS is it's got a real logic to it and it's very flexible. You can do lots and lots of things and there's a minimum of just stupid stuff or arbitrary stuff in it. But the thing that people hate about GURPS is just so many complexities, so many possible skills, so many permutations. It's just overwhelming. And so the GURPS with this sort of just constantly knocking off the rough edges because you've been using it over and over and over again. And anything that's too complicated, you can't remember how to do it anyway, so you just don't do it. That I found works really well. And the last game that I played before this Grail Quest one, so the last game I ran was inspired by Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea trilogy, which is a really terrific background for a role-playing game. And that was just a 3-page version of GURPS where we had different attributes, we had different skills, we had different magic rules, but it was basically the GURPS system of you roll 3 dice. If you roll a 3, that's really good. If you roll an 18, that's really bad. It worked. It worked really, really well. And you realize actually like GURPS on 1 page can probably work and might actually work better than GURPS on 400 pages. But maybe that's just me getting old.
Well, we're talking about things that you're doing now, you only just released a podcast, the Cautionary Tales podcast, and that's a little different from the other things you do, isn't it? Cautionary Tales. So, so for people who aren't aware of it, what's the idea behind Cautionary Tales?
So I'm really enjoying Cautionary Tales a lot. It's a real creative outlet. Cautionary Tales they're true stories, and I tell the story. We've got some great actors. We've got composer, sound designer working on the podcast. So I think they sound really good.
Helena Bonham Carter
playing Florence Nightingale. Jeffrey Wright played Martin Luther King. I mean, Jeffrey Wright giving these Martin Luther King speeches. He just sounds incredible. Helena Bonham Carter sounds like she's having so much fun with Florence Nightingale. She's really good. And Alan Cumming, he's been in them. And we've got lesser known actors who are they're very, very versatile. They're playing lots and lots of roles across the podcast. So it's really fun to listen to. And the sound design as well. There are just lots of tiny little sort of touches with the sound design. And there'll be a popping open of a can of Pepsi just at the moment where something bad happens to the Pepsi Corporation or something like that. So they're great fun to write. I get to bring the nerdy social science, the psychology, or this is what a safety engineer would make of how this airship blew up, or this is how an economist would think about this. So bringing in ideas from social science to explain what happened in the story. And so you've got this interlude where I say, look, what's really going on here is this. And then we go back to the story, and all of the cautionary tales, as you might guess, are about things going wrong. Some of them are quite funny. Some of them are just awful and tragic. Occasionally they have happy endings. Usually they don't. But they're great fun. The most recent one, it'll still be recent, I think, when this interview airs. But a recent one, which was published mid-April, is a cautionary tales about the original satanic panic over Dungeons and Dragons, and specifically the disappearance of James Dallas Egbert, who is this poor kid who disappeared, and then there was this frenzy of speculation that it was something to do with Dungeons and Dragons. And so that story is really interesting to explore, because you've got this larger-than-life character, William Deere, who's like this private investigator who really does a lot to build up the credibility of this theory that Dungeons and Dragons is involved. You've got extracts from Tom Hanks's Mazes and Monsters, and at the same time, you've got me talking in a slightly confessional way about my own hobby and talking about the history of D&D and like what it really is, and where it came from. And then contrasting that with just the crazy theories people had about this poor young man's disappearance. I mean, really interesting. I had no idea, actually, of a lot of the details of that story. They are fascinating.
Yeah, it struck me that the person at the centre of it is William Deere himself, isn't he? He's a bit like Kirk Douglas's character in Ace in the Hole, isn't he? He's that kind of flamboyant a journalist who wants to generate stories and be the centre of them.
Yeah, and he's really creating this whole story, and the sound design. I mean, I can be very proud of the sound design on Cautionary Tales because it's nothing to do with me, but there's this sort of funky 1970s theme for William Deere every time he comes on. Like you're right in a some kind of 1970s movie or cop show. But yeah, he does crazy things like he hears that maybe Dallas. So he hears that Dallas Egbert likes to do this kind of dare game called trestling. He lies down on the railroad tracks and that lets the train run over him. And apparently this is a thing that maybe he did. And so William Deere's like, well, I'll have to give that a try. So he goes and lies down on the tracks in front of this train. And you're just thinking, could he really have done that? Did he actually do that? Or did he just, because it's a really sort of weird, interesting, engaging element in his story, did he just claim that he did it? I don't know what's weirder. I don't know whether it's weirder that he did it or weirder that he didn't do it, but he said that he did. I don't know. But William Deere is absolutely driving the story. And there is this amazing moment in which I was not able to to fully explore in the podcast because there wasn't enough time. But when William Deere has his first experience of what Dungeons and Dragons actually is, he absolutely loves it. So he's like, oh, maybe the dungeon master will be wearing a pointy hat, or he doesn't know what to expect. Maybe we'll have to go into the steam tunnels. And of course, it's just an ordinary game. Sounds like a really good game. And William Deere has a great time, but he sort of, the way he portrays it, it's like he completely loses his sense of self and he kind of wakes up and the dungeon master's gone and he's there all alone in the room with the dice in front of him on the table. And he's like, maybe Dallas Egbert just lost his mind playing this game because this game is so good. And you're thinking, well, I mean, it does sound like it was a good game, but I mean, would you really just zone out so much, didn't even notice that the game master had left? So yeah, it's a very strange story indeed.
Yeah, and I like it as part of your confessional. You make the point that this is an example of democratizing creativity. That it makes people creative and produce things in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. I mean, if we were to say, oh, go on, get on stage and act in a play or write a book, I think for a lot of people that would be, I mean, people might have the desire to do that, to have that creative outlet in their lives, but it would just seem to be impossible to do that. The commitment of time and energy. But for a game, you're acting, you're creating. So many gamers write their own rules. That's just totally standard. I mean, how many people would watch a Marvel movie and go, I think I'll write my own script for a Marvel movie? I mean, not many. But loads of people would play Dungeons and Dragons and say, oh, I'm going to modify the rules. I'll hack that about. Or I'll read a published scenario and I'll make my own scenario up. It's just completely standard. I think we start to take it for granted because we're all hobbyists and we love this game. If you take a step back and look at the level of creativity that's required to run a game or to play a game versus what most people are habitually asked to create in the course of their lives, which is not very much, sadly. I mean, I think it is remarkable.
So yeah, so the podcast is available, and I do encourage people to listen to it. I really enjoyed it, and like you, I learned some new things. I actually got the book here. Never read it. He went on to do stuff about O.J. Simpson as well, didn't he, William Deere?
He did. He did a book called O.J. Simpson is Innocent and I Can Prove It, and then I think he did another one that said Simpson was guilty. I got confused. He did Alien Autopsy, Factual Fiction, which was a TV show. So yeah, I mean, he's a very interesting character. He's still alive. He's still going.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the weird thing about that whole episode is that I think a lot of people know about the steam tunnel story and the disappearance of Dallas Egbert. And I think a lot of us were sort of dimly aware of it at the time if we were old enough. And it's in the folk memory of the hobby. And it was a huge media event at the time. The newspapers were really, really interested. But if you ask people, well, what actually happened? Most people have got no idea. Like, what did happen? And we have this sense that Dungeons and Dragons is perfectly safe. But was he? Did he ever play Dungeons and Dragons? Did he disappear? Did he survive? Did he die? Nobody knows. Well, I mean, I know, and it is known, but most people don't remember any of the details of the story. They just remember there was this big fuss because this kid disappeared, and maybe Dungeons and Dragons was to blame. And interestingly, it was a huge boost for Dungeons and Dragons. It really, from a hobby that people just had barely heard of, to something really mainstream. So Dungeons and Dragons was in E.T. as being this cool new thing that kids played. E.T. was about 3 years later. It really transformed the prospects of the hobby, albeit in a very sad way.
Yeah, and I think people in the folk memory remember elements of Mazes and Monsters, and that gets conflated with it, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mazes and Monsters, Tom Hanks completely loses his mind. I mean, I've not seen the film. I've read the synopsis. So I've heard extracts. Forgive me for never having actually watched Mazes and Monsters. But I think a lot of people have the sense that Mazes and Monsters was a sort of was loosely based on what happened to Dallas Egbert, but there's absolutely no connection at all. I mean, it was based on a novel which was inspired by the sort of weird fantasy of what might have happened to Dallas Egbert, but actually the connection between the two is I mean, well, there's no connection. I mean, other than there's a role-playing game and something bad happens to a teenager. Yeah, that is possibly overstretching the connection.
So let's talk about your everything. And I don't think this will come as much surprise to people, right? The game that means everything to you, and the role-playing experience that means everything to you.
Yeah. So the role-playing experience that means everything to me is playing in Legend, this world that was created by Dave Morris and Oliver Johnson. And I was very, very into it before I met them. I think I maybe slightly had to hide just how into it I was, because I think I probably would have been slightly scared. And I've played it using different role-playing systems. The actual system doesn't matter so much. So at first, I'd play it using Dragon Warriors as a system, and it works perfectly well, but it shows its age. Then I switched to GURPS. And yeah, more recently, we've been experimenting with Dual Spider. But there was one game I played. So we started when I was a first year at university, 1992. And I vaguely had the sense, I seem to remember that Legend was set in 993, like the books were set in the year 993. So I thought, 1992, 993, that kind of works. And the world comes to an end in the year 1000, of course. So I had in mind that when we hit the year 2000, there'd be some apocalyptic event. And so this game ran for 7 years. And the characters got more and more involved, and they started small, and in a classic role-playing format, would get more and more tangled up in the affairs of the world, more and more powerful, more and more pivotal in this coming apocalypse and their attempts to prevent it. But I feel since then, we've just been doing endless prequels or explorations. It's like the Marvel universe. You just go, okay, well, we've seen it from this character's point of view. Let's go back and we'll have a different group of people who've got different interests and different focuses. And every Christmas we tend to play a game with a group of characters, mercenaries called the Iron Men. And in a way, it's become a bit of a pastiche. It's sort of because as you get over and over again every Christmas, it's a new Christmas, and there's some new kind of plot to ruin Christmas. Only it's medieval Christmas, and the Iron Men step in and fix it, and see you again next year. So in a way, it's slightly ridiculous, but at the same time, people are just like, well, let's do that again. We want a Christmas special. It wouldn't be Christmas without a Christmas special. And the Christmas special that most people want is the Iron Men Save Christmas one way or another. So yeah, it's great fun.
And what is so enduring about the setting of Legend? Is it something to do with British folk memory and that sense of nostalgia? When we were talking about it, we said things like it has echoes of Robin of Sherwood and even Rupert the Bear. The way that those images of trees and English countryside.
Yeah, it's very, very much what Robin of Sherwood. And presumably Robin of Sherwood was an influence on Dave. I think it must have come out a year or two before Dragon Warrior was published. It hits a sweet spot. It's just off the real medieval history of the world. And I think this must have been deliberate, but maybe it was just a brilliant accident. Like if you look at a map of Legend, there's the thing that looks like the British Isles, but it's not quite the British Isles. So it doesn't have the island of Ireland. Instead, that bit is kind of like Wales and Ireland together, but it's got a sort of Viking bit, and it's got a sort of Siberia bit, and it's got a bit that's, there's sort of the Spain, Germany, France, sort of, but not quite, Mediterranean, not quite. It's all just a bit off. And the religion is like Christianity, but not quite. There's an Islamic faith, but not quite. And it just gives you all those footholds. You need all those cultural references. People aren't having to learn a whole load of stuff off by heart and be completely confused because the religious structure of the universe is completely different, or the geography is completely different. You kind of know what it's like, but yet at the same time, none of it is actually medieval history, and so you can change anything you want. And there's something about that works really, really well. You instantly, if I want to run a game in Crath, which is the sort of Russia, Siberia kind of place, I read some Russian folk tales, but Crath isn't Russia, and it's got its own history and it's got its own character. So that, I think, is part of the magic. But yes, the scenarios and the little examples that Dave and Oliver created, they're very rich with this sort of quite dark, quite whimsical folklore. It's hard to put your finger on exactly why it's so evocative. But one of my favorite scenarios in the original books, there's an assassination attempt on the liege lord of the characters. They chase this assassin. The assassin runs into an old barrow, and in the barrow, he's set up that there'll be an astral gate that'll take him to safety. He's got this agreement with the sorcerer. Actually, the sorcerer's double crossed him. Not that that's particularly central to the plot, but when you break into the barrow, you realize the barrow has been taken over by goblins, and the goblins have blocked the access to the astral gate. And so there's this assassin in the barrow trying to unblock the astral gate and escape. There are the goblins and there are the players, and they're all there. They're all kind of fighting each other, and this is incredibly tactically interesting. And yet at the same time, the thing that I really remember of that is the description of chasing after this guy over the frost and spotting there's just a little hand mark he leaves on a tree trunk, and his hand has just melted the frost, and that's how you know where he is. So just those poetic observations of all the detail, yet at the same time, it's just a great kind of Mexican standoff of a scenario.
And give us a sense of what those game sessions are like, because I know Ralph Lovegrove from Fictoplasm, people know, actually came in the end for your games master for one of your groups, and he said that it was an unusual experience because of the way that the players were playing around with the ideas. So yeah, what's the ethos of the group?
So yeah, I remember that we were all online at the time. It was mid lockdown, and so there's that additional barrier to understanding when you've got a new GM coming in. But it was a Powered by the Apocalypse game that I think it was Powered by the Apocalypse. Anyway, it was a system that it was quite new wave. We're all old school. We didn't really understand quite how it was all supposed to fit together, but it was Call of Cthulhu-ish. I think it was a Cthulhu hack. Yeah, that was what it was. Cthulhu hack.
Is it Cthulhu Dark? Is it that one?
Maybe. It was
one of those.
It was super simple. You're just rolling a couple of dice for your effect. But I think what Ralph found bizarre was that we completely failed to engage with the plot. But of course, that's always how it seems to the GM. Like, the players aren't thinking, I'm not engaging with the plot. We thought we all thought it was great. We had a great time. There were some really, really eerie, spooky things. There was a house, and you could see all the hand marks of people on the inside of the house. The hand marks, a lot of them were children, even their marks on the inside of the windows. And you're like, oh, what's going on in that house? Who are those children? Oh, this is so creepy and Cthulhu-esque. It was brilliant. But Ralph was like, you guys just ignored everything and just did your own thing. So yeah, I know it didn't. When I was playing it, I did not think to myself, oh, we're really riding a coach and horses through this game. It didn't seem that way to me at all.
Yeah.
But the players in that group, they're very, they're great players. People will grab a character concept and they'll run with it. And there is no sense, I have to say, of, oh, well, this is what we're supposed to do. Like, we're obviously supposed to take the guy in the bar who gives us the quest. You know, it's the kind of group where people will find something more interesting to do than take the quest from the guy in the bar. But they're not just going to kill the guy in the bar because they can kill the guy in the bar. It's driven by character. And the fun thing about that is, of course, you can just improvise. And as a GM, you're probably best off throwing some ideas into the mix and seeing what happens. There's a cautionary tales about Martin Luther King and Gerald Ratner, a guy who destroyed his jewelry empire with an ill-considered speech. And I talk about the speeches of these two guys, of Gerald Ratner and Martin Luther King, and I talk about the power and the risks of improvisation. And actually, I think improvisation in a game is really important. It's very, very easy to overplan. And actually, if you've got a halfway decent group of players, you should be spending more time listening to what's going on, looking for what's interesting in what they're saying, and feeding that.
And when you appeared on Ralph's podcast on Fictoplasm, you were talking about Lyonesse and Jack Vance. And it's great that you make a remark about landlords in Lyonesse, how they always have a backstory and they're always there's always the source of trouble. And that's actually made its way into the new Mithras game as a result of you making that comment. So.
Yeah, I mean, Lyonesse is... people who haven't read Lyonesse, they should read Lyonesse. There's, I have to say, possibly a trigger warning for the first 50 pages, because it's a very sad story. And some of the people you think are protagonists, things don't go well for them. But it is a wonderful, wonderful creation that it's got the epic scope of a sort of Lord of the Rings or something like that, possibly slightly more Game of Thrones. But it roams all over this fantasy world, cast of thousands. And yet, one of the joys of it is the way that Vance will create something really, really interesting, a little encounter with an innkeeper or, a bandit on the road. And he'll bring so much joy and pleasure out of that encounter. The language, the imagination, the stuff that's hinted at and never fully explained. And then he'll move on. So there's that relentless creativity. There's that sense that there shouldn't be any filler. Like, everything you do should either be driving the plot or should be just a fascinating diversion. It's a very, very gameable approach to role playing, and I think it's probably not a surprise that Vance inspired Gygax in the first place. Some of Vance's earlier work, the Dying Earth stuff. I love it. I love it, but I particularly love the descriptions of food. This is now absolutely standard in a game of Legend. It's not a game in Legend unless you walk into a bar and you start specifying in exhaustive detail the way that you'll have gelid oysters and a pie with a tasty relish of leeks on the side. Also, a collation of cold hams and smoked fish. And of course, the innkeeper may or may not have this kind of thing, but if you're not coming in with some food attitude, you're not properly playing Legend. That's a very Vance Lyonesse influence.
Yes, yeah, and in the new game, they've actually got tables where you can generate the food, and that it's always great fun doing that.
Also got like a wandering meals table.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great.
Well, I favour making it up as you go along, but the table. I haven't looked at the Mithras game. It seems that it's something I should be paying attention to because I do love the Vance.
Yeah, well, Loz actually acknowledges your inspiration for the landlord's element of it. So
I'm honoured. I'm absolutely honoured.
Yeah, and I always say that as well about Lyonesse. Just power through the initial 50 pages, because it is quite difficult, isn't it? It's quite a difficult. It lays the groundwork, and it is quite sad and cruel. That bit of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cruelty in Vance, but it's usually cruelty to characters you don't care very much about. Basically the NPCs are being treated cruelly, but yeah, something really unfair and unpleasant happens to a very sympathetic character quite early on, and in a way, it motivates. Like in the end, the fact that this terrible thing happened at the beginning makes the end very satisfying. You feel it's not just, oh, there's the spooky dark lord who's doing dark things and must be stopped doing dark things. It's like King Casimir, who's an absolute bastard because of what he did right at the beginning. And God, I really want to see that guy defeated. And it feels much more personal and much more visceral.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's terrific. But the pacing's important. I do. The more I play, the more attention I try to give to pacing, and the sense of, well, I mean, if you think about a 4-hour game, you wouldn't think anything particularly of playing a 4-hour game. That's sort of pretty standard. But a 4-hour movie is a long movie. I saw the new Justice League movie. It's really, really long. So you've got to be driving the action as a GM, and not, I mean, by all means, make stuff up and put in these diversions to the plot. But the diversions have got to be fast moving and interesting, and they always are in Vance.
Yes. And I think, talk about legend. I think the way that he it portrays the Fae culture as well is good, because it's so unexpected and so unusual. To have that alongside the kind of quasi medieval stuff.
Yeah, and you really get a sense that they have got their own culture. They're very whimsical. There's a Fae character who is taught, she's half Fae, but her mother, who is a fairy, teaches her the imp spring twinkle toe, which is a sort of, you just make this noise and you do this with your thumb, and then you hiss like this, and if you want more effect, simply apply it at triple force. And it's there's no further explanation, but it works well. But there's one point where somebody's eyes are filled with bees and dark honey as a curse. This is amazing.
Yeah,
and he can't see because his eyes are full of bees and dark honey. And another point where someone is treated as regarded as having disrespected the fairies, and so he's just hurled 1,000 miles and lands on the beach the other end of Lyonesse, and has to make his way home from there. And that basically takes the plot of most of the book for him to get home. And it's just because he annoyed the fairy king. It's really good. It's well worth a read if you haven't encountered it.
Well, Tim, we are coming up to the hour mark, so I want to say thank you very much for taking part in the interview. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Well, it's a tremendous honour. I feel I don't fully deserve it because I just make stuff about games rather than actually being a proper game designer. But I love the podcast, and thank you for letting me be part of it. It's really kind of you.
Oh, thank you. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's attended Virtual Grog Meet this weekend, and to the Games Masters and players who made it possible. Thank you very much, and adios, amigos.
Hey.
Bye. Thank you very much. I don't have professional sound design, so
you don't need it. You got proper Zoom applause. You don't need sound design.